Detente and return to containment. President Richard Nixon made a policy called Detente, which is French for a relaxation of tensions. And so what Nixon is trying to do is he's trying to ease the tensions between the U.S. and communist nations, the major communist nations of the Soviet Union and China. And so he is going to have a series of policies that are going to try and open up negotiations and open up talks, I guess, of trying to reduce weapons and open up trade and all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, this policy of détente does not last very long. In fact, it ends when the Soviet troops invade Afghanistan, and the U.S. is not happy about that. And so we will actually give money and military aid to a rebel group who's trying to fight off the Soviets so that Afghanistan doesn't become communist. And that rebel group is called the Taliban. And so we actually helped the Taliban to get into power in Afghanistan, kind of a black mark in our history of bad choices that we make sometimes. So kind of a sad things. The things that we do in order to prevent communism from coming about is helping the Taliban to get into power. Anyway, eventually we do see the end of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. This Cold War will end in the 1990s with President Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union/Russia and President Ronald Reagan. Gorbachev is very open to making changes, what he sees as necessary changes in his country in order to make it more successful, making it more of a capitalist society as opposed to a communist society. And Reagan will be there to help him in that process. So this kind of brings about good questions of, well, why do these other countries behave the way that they do? Why are some more aggressive? Why are some constantly seeming to be in the middle of conflict? Why do we as Americans have to be involved in stuff? So there's all kinds of things to look at. But basically, political scientists have narrowed it down to 3 levels of analysis. When we look at foreign countries and how they behave, how they act, we look at 3 different levels. And the first is called the systems approach, basically looking at the power distribution of the world, depending on how we see the power distributed throughout the world, it kind of depends on how countries are going to act. So there are 3 systems that are looked at, and the first is unipolar. And unipolar says that one country is dominant in the world. And because that one country is dominant, it has a deciding factor in a lot of different things. It kind of has this parental mindset that it needs to police the rest of the nation. And there's a lot of political scientists that today would say the U.S. is part of a unipolar system, that we see ourselves as being the parental guide of the rest of the world, and so we are the dominant country. Another system that is looked at is the bipolar system, and bipolar basically means that you have 2 countries that dominate, and that would be very symbolic of the time period of the Cold War, where you had the U.S. and the Soviet Union, which were very dominant countries, which helped to determine the outcome of many other countries and their governments. So that's what they did. And the third level is the third system is a multipolar system, and this is where you have 3 or more roughly equal countries that dominate economically, politically, all kinds of stuff, socially. There's a lot of scientists today who say we have a multipolar system today, that you have the dominant countries of the United States, but also China, as well as India because of its population. Russia, still a very dominant force. Great Britain, still a dominant force. And so they're looking at saying each country is dominant in its own way depending on what it offers the world. That there are up-and-coming countries like Brazil and Venezuela that are going to have more influence in future years. So it kind of depends on how you view the world as to what kind of a system we have and which one is actually more at play. The second level of analysis is called the nation-state level. And what this does is it looks inside the country. What within the country makes it act the way that it does. So they look at like political systems. What is their political system? Are they a democracy? Are they a dictatorship? You know, what kind of a government system do they have? And what political scientists have found is that they came up with this theory called the democratic peace theory, that democracies don't fight each other. Democracies fight other kinds of governments like dictatorships, but they don't fight each other. And so if everybody was democratic, if everybody had a democracy, we would have no more war. Kind of find that hard to believe because people tend to find a reason to fight, but that's the theory, that if everyone was a democracy, there would be no reason for war because of political ideology. They also look at most wars today that are being fought are civil wars that are being fought within a country itself. It's not, we don't see like world wars happening anymore. Most fights are civil wars within the country itself, and a lot of it's based on religion, and a lot of it's based on ethnicity, that they don't like different ethnic groups within their country. The third thing that they look at is culture, and basically what they come up with from this is that some countries are just naturally more aggressive than others. If you look at countries like Germany, the historically inaccurate instigators of World War I and World War II, that country is just naturally more aggressive. They are very dominant. In fact, in Europe today, the German economy kind of, and Germany kind of runs the European Union. They're the financiers behind it. They are the ones making the major decisions. So they're very, very aggressive. Another example would be the United States. We are naturally very aggressive. You hurt us, you damage our property, you hurt our people, you endanger our trade. It tends to piss us off, and we're going to do something about it. Other countries that are very aggressive, Japan, naturally much more aggressive. China, very aggressive. So when you look at countries today, of the ones that are kind of the newsmakers, the ones that are naturally aggressive, they're the ones that are in the headlines a lot because they still defend their countries very adamantly. The third thing that they look at, or the third level of analysis, is the individual approach. And this is based on individuals within the country. That based on decision making and the leaders of those countries, there's different ways that you can view them. The first is called political psychology, just looking at the politicians and how they view the world, how they think about the world. So they have something called the attribution theory. And the attribution theory basically says that you give attributes to people. And attributes are like characteristics, or how you think of them. So you give external attributes to people you love, and you give internal attributes to people you hate. So let's give a kind of a real world example of this. Let's say something bad happens, and in this helps to explain why the something bad happens, is how you view somebody. So I'm walking down the hallway and I run across a student and I say hi, and the student doesn't say hello back to me. So if this is a student I like or love, I'm going to give them external attributes as to why they didn't say hello back to me. I'm going to think, oh, maybe they're tired. They didn't get enough sleep last night. Maybe they had a fight with their significant other, their boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe they ran out of gas this morning. Something outside of them is affecting why they didn't say hello back to me. Okay? Now, if it's a student I really don't like, I'm going to give them internal. So I'm going to be like, oh, well, who do they think they are? They're just snooty and what a pain in the butt. They're always like this every day. They're just little snots kind of thing. So I'm giving them actual internal characteristics. It's something flawed in their personality is why they didn't say hello to me. So it's not because of something outside of them. It's something inside of them. So it's the same thing works with countries, that if it's a country we like, we're going to be saying, oh yeah, well they're struggling with this and they're struggling with that, and they're having their economy's kind of slumping, and they're having to deal with this pressure from this other country. So if it's a country we like, if it's a country we don't like, we tend to say, well, they're just stupid and they're backwards and they just aren't understanding reason when we're telling them that they shouldn't do this. So we're giving them an internal, that it's their culture or their mindset that's wrong, rather than outside forces that are forcing them to do the things that they do. So that's the attribution theory. Another look at the individual approach is called the sunk cost trap. And the sunk cost trap is where it is really hard to stop doing something once you've made an investment. And our war in Afghanistan and our war in Iraq is an excellent example of this, that it's really hard for us to get out of that war because we've made such, either one of those wars, because we've made such an investment in it. We've spent millions, billions of dollars of money. We have lost thousands of lives trying to create a democracy in both of these countries. And so it's really hard for us to stop because we've got this investment in it, but we're not really seeing any returns on our investment. So even though it's hard for us to stop, we're not seeing any returns. And so we're it's a sunk cost, that we are trapped because we've sunk so much cost into it. And we can't get out of it until we can justify the cost. Kind of working hand in hand with that is the prospect theory. And the prospect theory says that we will take a big risk in order to avoid a loss, but we won't risk in order to gain something. And a great example of this is the game show Deal or No Deal. And the game show is the one with the suitcases, where you have money amounts in the suitcases, and the person has to decide, okay, I want to get rid of suitcase 3 and suitcase 17, and then this outside guy makes a deal with you and says, okay, well, here's what you could potentially get $1 million because it's still out there in one of those suitcases, but I'm going to make you this deal and offer you $50,000 instead. Now you could take the chance. You could take a big risk. You could take a big risk and try and get that $1 million. But you could also say, no, I'm going to take the $50,000 because I don't know that I'm going to get that $1 million. So the prospect theory is a huge example of that. So same way with like lottery tickets. Lottery tickets are a great example of the prospect theory, that you keep playing and playing and playing and playing and playing and playing and playing without winning anything, but you're not really gaining anything. And that's a good example of a sunk cost trap too, is the lottery, that it's hard to stop once you've made that investment. You've spent $100 on your lottery tickets, but you haven't seen anything. So, oh yeah, if you spend one more dollar, you might get that $1,000, and that's going to make up for all the $100 that you spent. Prospect theory, same way, that you're going to take a big risk and keep playing because you don't want to lose all that money. You have that prospect that you could win big, and you could win a lot of money and make up for everything that you've spent. So those two tend to go hand in hand quite a bit in how countries make decisions, that once they've invested in it, it's hard to stop, and you take a big risk in order to avoid looking like you're losing. So that is why some countries behave the way that they do.